Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending our webinar today. The subject of our webinar is Insights for Success in a Post-COVID World. And I think this image embodies what we're trying to say quite well. Before COVID, we were on stable ground. There was lots of opportunities. After COVID, it'll be exactly the same. But at the moment, we need to watch our step, evaluate the new world, evaluate the new opportunities before we can progress forward. My name is Pari Datta, and my co-presenter is Jessica Platt, and we're really looking forward to exploring some of the insights from our work with you today. I should mention that this webinar will be available online at a later stage, so we will be able to share this with you for future reference. So, to tell you a little bit more about what we're going to be discussing today, this changing world, this post-COVID-19 world, creates unique opportunities for innovation, just like any of our previous crises as a human race. So if you think about the Great Depression, that led to so many great innovations like car radios and electric razors, and the financial crisis changed our financial system. So there will be good that comes out of these difficult times. Innovation comes a lot of the time from unusual connections that you don't think it's easy to make. And normally we think of a man in a white lab coat with big hair and glasses, a genius making these connections, but actually you can make good connections that lead to innovation yourself. What we're going to show you today is a systematic, logical, evidence-based way of making those connections, connecting technologies and solutions with trends and needs. And we're hopefully going to show you that anyone can make these connections with these simple steps that we show you and demonstrate to you today. So just a little bit about us to give you some background and context to what we're going to be discussing today. So my name is Pari Datta. I'm a senior innovation consultant at Cambridge Design Partnership. And my work is all about helping companies find new innovation and growth opportunities. That could be from a user insight, something that users really want, an unmet need. It could be from a technology change, or it could be simply from a market dynamic perspective. Something's changing in the market and this creates an opportunity. Usually it's a fusion of all three. And I help my clients find strategies and concepts to address and enable them to win in these opportunities. I've had the privilege of working with some of the world's leading healthcare and consumer companies over the last 12 years. I'm originally a PhD geneticist, so a lot of my work has been focused on diagnostics and life sciences, but I have worked in such diverse environments. My innovation career has taken me from farms to operating theatres, very diverse spaces. One thing I always hold true is the process of innovation is a process. It can be structured, it can be consistent, just like any other part of product development. And this is something that's very important to me as an innovation facilitator.
And my name is Jessica Platt. I'm a graduate insights researcher. I have an academic background in anthropology, so I'm really interested in human behaviour and really understanding what people sort of really need rather than just what they say, and understanding how people interact with the things in their everyday life. For this piece of work, I've done some really in-depth research into what's happening now to understand how consumer behaviour is changing and look at how this may impact future trends, future technology and future innovation.
So today's webinar will focus on these 4 different areas. We'll talk about changes in the world. We'll show you some stories, some insight stories if you like, about some technology solutions that could address some of these changes and opportunities. Then we'll show you the systematic process we talked about how you create a map, a technology map that links need, trends to technology solutions. Then give you some 6 useful steps to successful insights. And that's really the whole gamut of what we want to talk about today. So the world is changing. I don't need to say that to you. Every day you read the news, something major is changing. We're observing some of the biggest changes that we will ever see in our lifetime. The world has changed more probably in the last 3 months than it has done in the last 10 years. I think for me, one of the biggest examples of that is video conferencing. For years, we've discussed how we should be doing more of it. Yet we've adopted it faster in the last 3 months than we have in the last 10 years. The progression has been amazing. Once we had to, we did what we had to do. We adopted video conferencing. Consumer trends are changing dramatically. We all know about the mantra of stay safe, stay healthy. This is something that's becoming embedded into the consumer consciousness. So trends are changing very, very rapidly. And so the world after COVID, the crisis that we're in at the moment, could be very different. The pressures of a new recessionary environment might mean that public spending will decline. The need for everything to be safe and healthy might change the way that people look at the world.
At CDP, we track mega trends and other trends that are going to influence the way that people see the world in the next 8 to 10 years. And so the mega trends that we've identified as being important are things like traceability, digital connectivity, and time poverty. And what we've seen during the COVID-19 crisis is it's disrupted the way that people prioritize their needs, and therefore these mega trends have sort of changed in their level of prioritization in people's minds. You know, right now, time poverty is not such a challenge as it once was. We have some time, but at the same time, we're really invested in understanding exactly where our food comes from. The big panic buying shortage, we're really interested to know, is it local? Is it sustainable? Will it still be here if there's another panic next week? Digital connectivity, again, by necessity, has become a huge part of our lives, and it's become a real lifeline for people locked down at home. Personalization, we're spending a lot of time on our own, really thinking about what we want and what we need. And people are now looking for products that really meet those needs for them. And of course, health and wellness is at the forefront of everyone's mind at the moment as we try and stay healthy and make sure that the people we love stay healthy too.
So what this means for the world is that the innovation pipelines at companies may have to change quite dramatically. The world is changing, the products that people want is changing, and we're already seeing some elements of what people are buying is changing. That to me has been really interesting. Apparently, the sales of jigsaws are up by 400% over the last couple of months. People's needs are changing. They're at home more, so they need products that they can use to occupy their time. So every aspect of our world has changed and is changing. In terms of healthcare, we're looking for solutions that make sure that we're healthy and safe at all times. We're communicating using VR and video conferencing. We're working from home, something that has become the way that we do things now. We're traveling much less. It's only if we really need to. And our leisure time has changed because the home is now becoming the hub of everything. It's becoming the restaurant, the pub, the gym, the place where you sleep, the place where you work, the place where you spend all of your time. The world is changing completely at the moment. So this presents really great growth opportunities. And our question really was, what kind of technologies will be required to enable and empower, make these opportunities happen? So we went back to a method that we use at CDP to find new technologies, find new novel technology solutions to solve consumer needs. This is a technique for technology searching that we've built over the last 20 years across many different engagements for many, many different industries. And it's an ideal tool for a lockdown moment because you can work at home by yourself using this tool, but you can also engage your clients and your friends and your colleagues by video conference to help you build a map to make those unusual connections. It's a very powerful technique that has really led to some compelling products that are on the market today. So the reasons why I like this technique is it's very creative. It helps you make those unusual links. Maybe there's a solution from the textile industry that will work in the healthcare market. You can find it using this technique. It's comprehensive because it makes you feel that you've explored the whole space. So when you're trying to choose whether to invest in a technology, you feel like you've looked at everything and this is the right solution that you're taking forward. It helps you to work out where your competitors might go in the space. It also helps you to get the language in your team right. So your R&D team can speak the same language as your marketing team, connecting user need with technology. And finally, I think this is the most important point. It's customer centric. Technology searching is not searching for technology for the sake of it. There has to be a need. There has to be a solution to a need. It links customer need very intricately with solutions from technology. So with that in mind, we created some insights using technology mapping, some insights that could be powerful, some technology insights that would be useful in the post-COVID world. And we'd like to discuss the stories behind some of these insights with you in the next section of our webinar. So story number 1 of 6 is about sharks. Sharks are highly conserved. They've not evolved much in the last millions of years. They've been around for hundreds of million years, before the dinosaurs, in fact. And because they live in extreme environments, they have some unusual properties that are very useful. So our story, the shark story, begins with health and wellness. We've got this drive to be safe and healthy at all times, everywhere where we go, at home, at work. We want to be safe and healthy all the time, everywhere. And this has created an intense need for new diagnostic tests. Apparently, the diagnostics market for COVID-19 is worth $5 billion today, and it's a new market that generated, of course, just this year. It's growing rapidly at 5 to 6% per year, apparently. But also, there are 600 different product solutions either in development or consideration on the market for COVID-19 diagnostics. So it's a very, very big market that's emerging, and there's a great demand for new tests. So I just wanted to dwell on this slide for a minute. The remarkable range of technologies to address COVID-19 diagnostics is really fascinating. On the right-hand side, I show you a nanopore, and basically through the nanopore, you can read a DNA sequence from a virus. That's one of the technologies that's out there at the moment. So if we look at the antibody tests that we see in the news being talked about at the moment, they're not very sensitive. So the antibody tests are a bit like the pregnancy test. They're called lateral flow tests that you see in every single shop in the world at the moment. And the problem with these antibody tests is they're not very sensitive compared to lab tests. What that means is you generate weak signals. What that really means is that you get false negatives. So if someone is actually registering as a negative on the test, they might actually be positive. It's a false negative. So what's the solution to this? How can we improve things? The answer may come from sharks. Now, the reason for this is because conventional antibodies are quite large. You see that on the left-hand side, they're quite large molecules. Shark antibodies are peculiarly small. They're about 50% of the size, which means you can pack more of these antibodies into a small space, which automatically generates bigger signals. Now, if you see the virus particle with its characteristic spikes on the right-hand side, if you have a smaller antibody, you may be able to access it in an improved way. So this is going to improve potentially the range of signals you can get and provide better tests for COVID-19. So these antibodies from sharks could provide that answer. And in fact, another insight I can tell you is that camels have similar smaller antibodies. It's these animals that live in extreme environments have these unique properties that lead to solutions that could be used in diagnostics. So that's our first insight story.
Another interesting insight story is the connection between fertility testing and testing for COVID-19. So this is being really driven by digital connectivity. At the moment, we measure everything. If it's important, there's an app for it, there's a wearable for it. We know everything about our calorie count, our step count, our heart rate. And since COVID-19 became the big issue that everyone's talking about, there was a new thing to measure, and that was our body temperature. And this became very important as soon as it was flagged as one of the major symptoms of COVID-19. There are all those classic images of the everyone having their temperature taken outside, such as this. And so people are being encouraged to take their temperature. The issue is that body temperature fluctuates throughout the day. That your temperature in the morning will be different to your temperature in the evening. And so one-off readings don't give a good indication of the big peaks and troughs that signal you're about to get a fever. A solution for this is some of the wearable fertility trackers that are already on the market and track temperature fluctuations over time. There are fertility trackers that you wear in your ear, they're like earbuds. There are fertility trackers that you wear around your wrist. And all of these take multiple temperature sensors over a period of time, so often overnight. And if everyone was measuring that, we'd all see these kind of sudden spikes or sudden erratic changes that would indicate illness. And so there's this potential future where everyone is using fertility trackers, not for fertility, but for COVID-19. And these companies who already have this technology developed have an opportunity to literally double their market share by just changing the app, changing what they're measuring to provide a solution to COVID-19. Another important measurement that people are taking now is their oxygen saturation levels. Oxygen saturation levels have become incredibly important, and this is linked to personalization, this idea of really having products that are personal to you. Oxygen saturation levels during the COVID-19 crisis has been essential because this virus impacts everybody differently. And so it's hard to know what level of care you need. There's been even incidences of people with hypoxia, being able to walk and talk, and walking into hospitals with incredibly low oxygen saturation levels. So it's important to know what they are. Video-based vital signs monitoring gives accurate, personalized readings of all of your vital signs in real time. And this is technology that's already been developed. But as we sit on Zoom meetings waiting for our colleagues to join us, as we pay for products with facial recognition on our phones, there are all of these opportunities where we're sitting looking at cameras. And it's not a great leap of the imagination to think that perhaps it wouldn't take much for our cameras to start using the little pulse beneath our eyes to check all of these vital signs, so that as we're waiting for a meeting to load, or as we're trying to buy something on our phone, we get an immediate reading with our heart rate, our oxygen saturation, even our stress levels. And that would, again, help people to really understand exactly what's happening in their body and whether or not they need to seek help.
So our next insight story is about mussels. Mussels are a great food source. They're packed with protein, and that's the main component of meat products that we buy. Our story in this insight story begins with traceability. Global supply chains are changing. Obviously, for many of our different products, the focus has been China. Globalization has meant products produced in China are shipped across all over the world. But as the world changes, traceability becomes important. People are looking for more local supply chains, which they feel are safer in terms of getting products out there in crisis situations. We've all seen those horrific pictures of people fighting for food, hoarding food at the early days of this crisis. And one of the reasons for this could be that food is sourced from afar. Apparently 50% of our beef products are still sourced from abroad, predominantly from Europe, and 30% of our pork-related products too. And of course, we all know about the dangers of zoonotic infections. So when animals and people live in close quarters, the chances of a devastating infection or virus transitioning from one species to the other increases. And in some ways, it could have been worse. If something like Ebola, with its 10% mortality rate, combined with the intense infection rate of this current coronavirus comes about, that could be even worse. So people are aware of the fear of animals living close together with humans and the potential for development of these viruses. And so there's this skepticism around meat, potentially, the dangers of meat. So what if we produce muscle cells in large numbers in fermenter tanks? We have these fermenter tanks in warehouses just down the street from you. It's still meat-like, it still has the same properties of meat. And this is something that is already being developed for the market by companies like Mossa Market, artificial meats actually based on animal cells. So our next insight story goes to brass. Brass is a very important alloy in the history of human life. So brass is an alloy of copper and zinc, and it's been used for weapons. It's been used for the artifacts that we see fading in museums. It's been used on musical instruments like saxophones, as we show on this image here. So our story here, again, begins with health and wellness, but this time we're focusing on travel. The way we travel is going to change after this crisis. In fact, the way we traveled in 2019 may become even more dated than this image that we see here. People are terrified of traveling with members of the public at the moment because of the risk of infections. The issues are that the virus can be anywhere. It could be in the droplets of air that we exhale. It can live on surface of ours, and even our fibers of clothing might contain or carry the virus. So what if we embedded copper and zinc particles into the fibers of our clothing, and these will kill the virus on contact? So basically, through a series of reductions and oxidations, copper and zinc nanoparticles can kill the virus. An interesting element of this story is the fact that people used copper vessels for drinking, for example, in ancient China. And the reason for that was the antimicrobial properties. Even back then, that was a consideration. So there's a lesson from history in this story. So our final insight story goes to the forgotten microorganism at the moment, bacteria. This story begins with health and wellness as well. And this time I've had an image of work because that's such an important part of our lives. And this crisis is going to affect the way we work considerably in the future. The current best tests for coronavirus diagnostics are based on detecting DNA. They're very expensive and difficult to miniaturize, and we've made great progress in this area, but Probably not enough. We're not at the stage where we can have a simple pregnancy test that's as accurate as these best-in-class tests that you find in the lab today. So why is this the case? Well, these tests that are so successful, the best-in-class tests, are based on copying nucleic acid. So it basically copies the DNA and amplifies them to numbers of copies that are then easier to detect. And it uses heating and fluorescence to do that. And so you can see that can make an instrument that's complicated in terms of the elements, electronics, mechanics, optics. So what is the solution to this? Well, we probably need to detect DNA in a different way. Now, the CRISPR-Cas9 system, this is amazing science. It's one of the biggest revolutions in biology that we've seen today, and happened first discovered in 2012. It's the immune system that bacteria effectively carry, and they use it to evade their own viruses. If you see these spider-like things at the right-hand side of the image, they're attacking the virus. These are called bacteriophages. Bacteria develop these systems to evade these kind of attacks. And what this system does, it basically targets it and specifically destroys DNA. And so maybe we can harness this technology or this theme in new lateral flow or paper-based diagnostic tests. And this indeed is something that's happening at the moment. So that's our 6 technology insight stories. I hope you found them interesting. Now what I'd like to do is tell you about how we came up with those stories. So I'm going to show you a few very simple principles that you can use to create a technology map. The first principle is the problem. Trends cause problems, and we need to solve those problems. That's the very beginning of our process. Solving the right problem is crucial to getting those compelling opportunities that we've shown you today. So let's start off with the trend. The trend was the use of public transport declines. The question or the problem we're going to try and solve is how can traveling with people become safer? Second principle, dimensions. Most problems that we're trying to solve are too vast for us to solve. There's too many components to them, too many dimensions. So classic problem that the world has always tried to solve is world peace. There is no way that a group of people in a room is going to solve the problem of world peace. They're better off focusing on a small element of that problem, maybe a dispute in their corridor, a dispute in a team, or a community dispute. That's the problem that you need to solve. So by breaking down the problem, you can solve the right challenges for you. How do you break down a problem into its dimensions? A problem may have process steps. So if you think about grass growing, it grows, it reaches an ideal length, it becomes too long. That's the process that you look at when you're trying to use a lawnmower. You have to cut it to the ideal length. A problem may have many dimensions. So grass has color, length, moisture, uniformity, or it may have components, DNA, chlorophyll, roots, shoots. So I hope that shows you how you can break down a problem. Break it down to its process steps, its properties, or its components. And then what you need to do is actually start to find those little problems to solve. These dimensions, these components can give you those little problems to solve, if you like, your dispute in the corridor. So if we break down the problem of how can traveling with people become safer, there are 3 dimensions we mentioned here: clothes, surfaces, and air. So you look at the problems or issues attached to surfaces. Contact with coronavirus on surfaces can cause infections. Linked to air, coronavirus infections can be caused by breathing or received by breathing. Linked to clothing, contact with coronavirus on clothing can cause infections. So these are the little problems that we're starting to solve. What we now need to do is look at the causes for these little issues. So let's take coronavirus infections can be caused by breathing in. Basically, the cause of this is that there's these micrometer-sized droplets in air, which are released by exhalation that contain the virus. So when you breathe out, these droplets get released into the air and they travel for a meter or so, and someone else can pick it up, and that's how they get the infection. If you look at the issue around clothing, coronavirus on clothing can cause infections. That's because the virus can survive on moisture-containing fibers of textile fabrics for several hours, maybe a day or 2 even, if it's not cleaned. So this is the cause of that particular issue. In order to find interesting technology solutions, we need to solve these mini causes, if you like. So we can come up with actions. The actions are what technologies need to do to solve these problems. And that's where the value comes in this process. We need to form the right actions. So looking at the cause of virus can survive on moisture containing fibers, how do we solve that problem? Well, we need to remove the moisture from the fibers. Or maybe we can actually plug in and embed antiviral chemistries into the fibers. Looking at the droplets released in air, maybe we can come up with a way of capturing the droplets. Maybe we can prevent the release of the droplets. These are the things that we're hunting for technologies to solve, the actions. The important thing that you'll note about these actions is they're very simple: remove, insert, capture, very general. What we want to do at this stage is make the problem easy for anyone to understand. I often think that it has to be simple enough for a 9-year-old child to understand. You de-expertise a problem so anyone can solve it, anyone of any background. And indeed, anyone from any background could come up with some really interesting solutions that are specific to their field. A chemist, a biochemist, a financial analyst will come up with different solutions to these little actions. So to take it from the top, these simple steps will lead you to the creative identification of really interesting technology insights, like our technology insight stories that we've discussed earlier today. So taking it from the top, how can traveling with people become safer? Let's look at clothing. An issue is that contact with coronavirus and clothing can cause infections. The cause of this issue is that a virus can survive on moisture-containing fibers of textiles for hours. And the action that a technology needs to take to solve this is insert antiviral chemistries into the fibers. And that leads you to the copper and zinc nanoparticles of our last stories. So that's the basic set of principles for successful technology mapping. Now what I want to do is give you 6 steps or tips to actually make this work for you. The first thing to do is always collect trends exhaustively. Look at the news, read market reports, talk to your consumers, talk to your friends, collect as many trends as you can. At a certain point, you'll realize that you have most of them on board because you keep coming up with the same trends and you have a lot of evidence to support those trends. Then what you need to do is be creative. Hypothesize their effect on the consumer to drive those issues and causes. It's the process of insight translation that you're doing here. And it is a hypothesis, so you need to really validate that hypothesis at some point. Talk to consumers, talk to experts. Is the hypothesis behind the problems that you're discussing true? Then define those actions, those things that technologies must do to solve the problem in as simple a way as possible. Again, think about the 9-year-old child, the expertising the problem so that anyone can solve it. Take your action and search the web, search Google, look at IP, talk to experts. Ideation sessions are great where you bring in lots of different people from lots of different fields and you look at the action in the set context of the problem, and you will come up with some intriguing solutions. And finally, I think this is a very important point. Create the whole map. Don't just create one part of the map because you won't get the global overview. Maybe there's an action that keeps coming up all across the map, and maybe that's where you should focus your innovation strategy. Maybe there's an issue that's just coming up all the time, and you've got a really unique insight on what actually is happening in the consumer's world. So that's my set of tips for successfully implementing the process of technology mapping. Just going to hand over to Jessica to wrap up.
So after doing this process of technology mapping, you come up with so many potential avenues and actions to explore. It becomes very easy to imagine a world post-coronavirus that looks very different from the world pre-coronavirus. For example, you might wake up and remove the overnight temperatures tracker and check your data on the phone, see what your temperature's been doing overnight, grab a sandwich containing meat that was grown in a local laboratory, and then head to the station wearing a copper-infused jacket and buy a ticket using the facial recognition on your phone, and then immediately receive a notification with your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation, and your stress level from your phone, from the facial recognition. So the world might change, and using this process, you can see what it might look like. And it's all about making the unexpected and the strange connections. And these don't just come out of thin air. The reason that we can really hold on to these interesting connections, these interesting leaps, these insights that we've found that seem so different to the world we knew before, is because it's part of a process. It's a very logical process. This mapping allows you to create very logical steps that lead you to conclusions that wouldn't seem logical, it wouldn't seem sensible even, without understanding that process. But that's how breakthrough innovation becomes possible. And that's how you can ensure that you meet your consumer needs in the future.
I'd just like to thank you for spending the time with us, listening to some of our insight stories and the application of the technology mapping methodology to build those insight stories. It's always very interesting to do this process. We've done it for so many different product categories, for so many different markets, from consumer markets to healthcare markets, from agriculture to industry. And it's a very effective process that's led to some really interesting results. Thank you for your time today, and we're happy to take any questions.
So it looks like we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A chat already. So Pari, the first question is, could I use a technology map to help me solve any kind of problem?
Yes, if you follow the process logically through, we've, as I've just discussed, applied it to so many different environments. It's useful on the big transformative projects where you're looking at sort of those breakthrough innovations, but it's also really useful on those really minute problems, those more delicate, more incremental problems. And as I said before, we've used it on consumer applications, we've used it on surgical tools, we've used it on diagnostics, we've used it widely to have some great results and that have led to products that are either on the market today or in development at the moment.
Brilliant. And I think that answers the second question as well, which was, can you share where this method has led to products being on the market? Are there any specific examples you can think of?
I can't give names of products specifically because of the client confidentiality issues of some of the work we work on, but I can tell you that there are products in the supermarket, in the oral care area, in the diagnostics area that have used this process in their evolution.
Fantastic. So I think, we've got one more. So Sarah Holland has asked, do you think academic institutes should follow this type of approach?
Absolutely. So I'm a former academic myself, and I often actually think about that question. And it would have helped me to actually map out the process of my research, to break down my research questions into many different avenues and work out which I should answer and which I should not answer. And actually, it's a very useful way of conducting your research engagement. You can logically defend where you're going.
Do you think the process would be any different for an academic institution versus the way that we use it?
I don't really think so, because at the end of the day, it's all starting off with the right problem. If you ask the right problem, then you'll get the right answers from it. So it's exactly the same process for a question or an academic research. So, for example, I'm thinking of a random research question you could be answering. So how do I improve the detection or the sensitivity of my diagnostic test? It's pretty much the same process.
So yeah, it's a very versatile tool that can be applied to lots of different settings and lots of different questions. But I think, like you said, we spent a long time thinking about exactly how to get that question right, because having the initial question clear in our minds really helped us to direct the research.
And actually, the principles of the process can be applied to lots of different questions. If we're taking to that level, it can be used to interrogate business models to see how you can change them. So although we focus this method of breaking down the problem on technologies, it is applicable to other business/science questions.
I think that's all the questions that we've had so far.
Well, thank you for your time, everyone. If you have any further questions, please email at the address that we show you on the screen here. As I mentioned before, the slides or the presentation will be available online shortly. We look forward to hearing your feedback, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.